Alright then YouTube, back once more for another quick review. This is going to be one more in the series of book reviews, and today we're going to be doing something Cornish related, Celtic breeze. Today we're going to be looking at Neil Kennedy's fantastic Cornish Solidarity, using culture to strengthen communities. There you go, Neil Kennedy, you can see it at the front, published by Evertype, a wonderful Republic of Ireland publisher. This is more recent, I do believe, yep, 2016, and they do a whole variety of other Cornish language and history related books. You can pause that and look at them as you wish, or look at the Evertype website. Preface by Alan Kent, Dr. Alan Kent, and Neil Kennedy, I guess Dr. Neil Kennedy now, because this book is, I think, a production of his PhD thesis, published in a obviously more commercial, usable, friendly format. It is nearly 200 pages long. It's not massively thick. You can get through it relatively quickly. This is an exploration of different conceptions of Cornish identity through different communities, and using a variety of conceptual frameworks to understand them, to talk about what Cornishness is, and some of the difficulties associated with the tourism industry's commercialisation, how it's been defined by external external agencies as well, and how that impacts people's conception of their own identity, ways to explain it, and if you like, at the end it also talks about how you can take these issues forward and which path Cornwall's going to go down for its definition of identity. Overall I found it pretty interesting. It was fun to read, pretty easy going. I didn't find it too challenging. If you're not familiar with things like the works of Pierre Bourdieu and social capital, or any of the perhaps more there's touches of feminist theory in it, there's other bits of what you might call French post-structuralist thinkers, then it might be a bit more difficult, but then there's nothing that you couldn't overcome just by reading it, you know. So if you're not familiar with the social symbolic or social or cultural capital, that's something you might learn by picking up and reading. Yes, so the thesis is, if you like, well, I'll go through to chapters. It's divided into 7 chapters, where he basically talks about the new Cornish movement, the evolution of Cornish culture and the movement, the ideas about what constitutes Cornishness from a social capital standpoint. Then he talks about the idea of cultural hygiene, which is, you know, use of language and words you can or cannot say to describe particular things, phenomena in this case. You know, how Cornish and Tredinnick cultures are represented and described. Then there's a bit about the tensions between the revivalism and the residual traditional stuff. So if you think about it, Cornish culture is tied into some of the people like Henry Jenner and Morton Nance, who tried to revive a Celticness of description of Cornwall with the recreation of a Cornish Gorsedd based on the Welsh one and other models, and the international Celtic movements happened at the time. In the revival of language, it was very key to put Cornwall's standing in relation to other Celtic nations and emphasise the Celticness. However, because the traditions and the language are lost, this involved a lot of historicity and reimagining of different traditions that may have documented evidence, but others that don't, and some are just made up, and how that's integrated into traditional stuff like, I don't know, Cornish feast days that are reinvented but have samba bands, or will have a way to integrate modern practices from other cultures into a Celtic tradition that's been revived from 100, 200 years ago, etc. In competition with the organic production of Cornish culture that's not been influenced by that Celtic streams, such as Methodist chapels, Cornish voice choirs, and a lot of the cultural paraphernalia that goes with industrial mining heritage and areas around that you find in places like Wales as well, similar phenomenon. And it's about how those two butt heads and the difficulties with it, and then how you think about that interacting with the tourism industry and how people package and try to sell what Cornwall is, really. He called this Cool Canubia, branding Celtic Cornwall. That's chapter 6. And the last one being, he talks about this pastiche of all these different identities competing sometimes, and not always. He points out some of the negatives to them too, as well as the benefits. The last chapter, something he calls Kerno land, or Kerno, i.e. Kerno being a Cornish word for Cornwall. So are we going to end up with the packaged, saleable, communicatable tourist representation of Cornwall defined externally by people outside of it and other various networks, or are we going to end up with the more organic production of some of the more typically industrial-based tropes for the identity, or we're going to end up with the Celtic-y type stuff, and how is that going to go forward and intersect? That's kind of the way it looks like, and there's some recommendations about where to go with that. Yes, quite interesting. I suppose I did enjoy it. It's got some interesting topics that it touched upon. It's very much written in a kind of structuralist approach to analysing things. There's not a lot of psychological theory you could use in something like this. It's more of in the vein of the theory that it uses. But then it is a production of a PhD thesis, so it goes with the territory. You will learn a lot about bits of linguistic, sociolinguistic theory, and if you don't have too much of a background in Cornish culture, you'll learn about the beginnings of the revival of Cornish culture and language and history, some of its institutions and key actors in it, which Neil Kennedy is in some ways. It has been for a long time. He put a lot of work into promoting forms of Cornish. There is Cornish language in bits of it, but it's pretty much all translated, so you don't need to worry about that. Yeah, it's an interesting piece of what you might call it, cultural anthropology, but it's also, you might say, is towards a philosophy of being Cornish as well. I would put it in that category too. Interesting, nice read. Thank you, Evertype, and thank you, Neil. Yeah, I recommend you go and have a dig of it and look at it. It's worth reading. Have a lovely day.